Okay, you just went through the section in the textbook about, well, I would say the history of experimental psychology, because one of the things that I hope is becoming obvious to you is there's kind of, well, there's actually a ton of psychologies, but in general, if you take the field of psychology, you can kind of split it into two parts. There are those psychologists who are really focused on understanding how our mind works, how we work. And they're not particularly focused on situations where we're encountering some sort of issue or problem. So, not clinical situations, just the normal human condition. How does our memory work? How does our attention work, etc.? So, I'm going to call those experimentally minded psychologists or empirical psychologists. Although this distinction will get a little blurry at some point. But on the other side, from Freud onward, we have the notion of the more clinical side of psychology, the side of psychology that is focused on trying to help people who are struggling in some way. So I'm going to come back to that second group. This one's about the first group. So you just heard from Wundt on the structuralists first, and then the functionalists. You had a sense of these people who are, again, really just trying to understand the mind. In fact, there is this concept called reverse engineering. And, sometimes I think this is a good way for people to think about psychology. But let's start here. Let's imagine you were on a walk somewhere and you were out in a field, and there was this thing laying in the field that was not of earthly making. You're sure it fell from the sky. It's some sort of alien thing. And you would like to understand what it is and how it works. But you didn't create it. And so you just have this thing. How can you figure it out what it's about? And so what people would often do in that case is kind of take it apart, take that thing apart and try to figure out the parts and how they all interact, and get a sense of what that does. And if you really get it figured out well, let's say it's a spaceship and we figure out it can fly or something, then we can also rebuild that, right? Because we've reversed engineered it. We started with the full thing and then figured out how it all comes together. To some extent, experimentally minded psychologists are doing this with us. It's like we are that thing in the field. We are this thing that can do amazing things, but we don't understand how we do it. We as humans do not understand the things that we humans are able to do. So we are now studying ourselves, trying to kind of figure out the parts of ourselves and how they all work and how they allow us to do the things that we do. So that's really the experimental psychologist mindset. Again, they're not so much worried about helping people who have issues. They're worried about just understanding how we're able to do the things we are able to do. And by the way, this is a good point for me to kind of go on one of my little soapboxes, which is the following. You are so much cooler than you know, than you give yourself credit for. The things your mind can do, the things that your brain does are amazing. We cannot create a computer yet that can do generally the sorts of things that you can do in terms of memory and attention and perception. We are all really, really amazing critters. And every now and then, I think I, as a psychologist, take time to think, wow, how is our brain, how are we able to do these things? It's that kind of coolness that drives people, first of all, into psychology. They want to know. They have that curiosity. They want to figure it out. So it was fine for the physicists to figure out how, things move down an inclined plane. And sure, that's all kind of cool. But, why can't you get that past relationship out of your mind? Or is there something you could do to do it? Now we're getting a little bit more into our lives, into ourselves. And so that makes psychology cool. And a lot of these experimentally minded people, that's what they're just trying to do is figure out humans. Okay. So if we have that set, now, the textbook kind of gave you this story about these people trying to figure out, the human mind early on, from people like Wundt, going to the functionalists, and then eventually kind of the way the textbook kind of describes it, going through behavior psychology and then cognitive psychology. And then at the very end, it talks a little bit about the fact that we have devices now that allow us to look at the brain. So I just wanted at the end of this section now to kind of bring this all together and kind of ask the question, well, where are we now? The psychology you are entering as students, what does it look like now? And really, I would argue on the experimental side that it's a combination of three of the powerful forces you read about. But now we have to do them all. We used to have to do one at a time. So, what are these three? Here it is: cognitive behavioral neuroscience. If I had to say what is most 80% of the psychological research composed of, or how does it fit, what are its components, it usually has these three components: a cognitive component, a behavioral component, and neuroscience component. So, very quickly, just to talk about them, the cognitive thing is all about the mind and the processes the mind is using to do things like store things in memory, retrieve things in memory, understand what it is you're looking at, make decisions in situations like this. So we have all of these algorithms, mental algorithms that we use to help us with these things. And cognitive psychologists were really interested in understanding those algorithms. And this, by the way, was the school of psychology I came out of. I was trained when the cognitive revolution was very strong. Now, the cognitive revolution came after the behavioral revolution, but it never lost the lessons of the behavioral revolution. And the lessons were this: there's not a lot in psychology we can measure directly or manipulate directly, but we can manipulate stimuli and we can measure behavior in very precise ways. And so whatever we're interested in, if we're interested in knowing algorithms and the mind is using the cognitive side, we also kind of need the behavioral part here to keep us firmly grounded in science, right? We have to show that these things that we think are going on, we think we're on the right track because they predict behavior. So ultimately, behavior is often the bottom line. We're going to talk more about the role of experiments and experimentalism and predictions, using experiments to make predictions. What are we typically predicting? We're typically predicting behavior. And so behavior is sort of where the rubber hits the road on this stuff, where we kind of see whether our thoughts and theories are correct or not. So just about every experiment has a behavioral component. But now, the ability to measure the brain and our ability to now understand the brain and the various systems of the brain and how they all interact. This used to be what neuroscience was focused on, right? Just trying to understand the brain and the systems. And still some people are very, focused on that. But more and more people are kind of doing all three of these at once. They want to predict behavior. They have theories about the algorithms that are underlying behavior and how those algorithms are connected to the underlying hardware of the mind. And that's what the brain is. So some people say mind is what the brain does, right? And so when we do research now, we often have to be able to talk on all three of these levels about our theories and about our ideas and about our data and how they fit. And the sense is you have a really good understanding of something when you can think about it at all three of these levels at once. So cognitive behavioral neuroscience, most of the professors that teach you, the research they do would fit into one of these areas. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. Those three things have all kind of hung on and then joined together as important. Now, I mentioned the professors that teach you, and so I want to use this as an excuse to bring up another little thing we're going to do, at least in this chapter, maybe, I think mostly in this chapter. But there's an old Sesame Street thing they used to do. They had this song, The People in Your Neighborhood. It went something like this. These are the people in your neighborhood, in your neighborhood, in your neighborhood. These are the people in your neighborhood. They're the people that you meet when you're walking down the street. They're the people that you meet each day. So the idea of this is they would introduce children to like policemen and firefighters and bus drivers and cooks and whatever, and give the children a sense of what those people do, because the children were going to interact with them, right? And it's good to know a little bit about these people. Well, you're at UTSC, and there are people in your neighborhood that you don't know, that you probably would like to interact with or will interact with. These are the other professors and staff members and such. And so we've created some videos where these people can introduce themselves to you. And so following this video, I'm going to post a few. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm going to give you like a whole bunch at once right here, or just give you a couple tasters, and then, you know, maybe at the end of every chapter for a while. Maybe let's do it that way. I'll give you a couple tasters of more experimental minded psychologists after this video. And then after the clinical section you read, I'm going to pop back in and give you a little bit of a chat, and then we'll have some of the clinical people there. So you can get to know some of the people in your neighborhood. Okay, and yes, sorry, I do sing occasionally. Alrighty, back to the book. Bye-bye.